Welcome back, gearheads. They looked innocent. Family cars, daily drivers, even Sunday cruisers. But under the hood, a whole lot of disappointment. These are the 12 worst sleeper cars of the 1970s. One of them looked fast enough to scare a Camaro until it moved. 1979 Mercury Cougar XR7. This car wanted to be both luxury and legend, a personal coupe with the length of a Lincoln and the ambition of a grand tourer. From a distance, it oozed confidence, hidden headlights, opera windows, a long hood that whispered secrets of V8 thunder, and yet it was all show, no go. Built for comfort and maybe retirement homes, this car teased speed but served sedation. Under that endless hood sat a 302 cubic inch V8, pushing out a modest 140 horsepower and just 245 pound-feet of torque. Acceleration, a glacial 0 to 60 in 13.5 seconds. That's if you floored it on a downhill. With wind behind you, it should have been a sleeper. It had the size, the stance, and the marketing budget to back it up. The XR7 trim even tried to channel some Cougar of old, a name once feared on the street. But by 1979, the Cougar had gone soft. The Mustang's wild cousin had become a plush cruiser, weighed down by emissions gear and wrapped in fake wood and chrome. It was more living room than racetrack, and that was the tragedy, because people expected more. From the outside, it looked like it could chase down a Trans Am, but inside, it was built to lull you to sleep before the first stop sign. So if you saw one at a light and thought, this thing might move, you weren't alone, you were just wrong. And the next one? It fooled even more people by looking like it belonged on a racetrack. 1976 AMC Matador Coupe Oleg Cassini edition. If a car ever deserved an Oscar for Best Costume Design, it was this one, the 1976 AMC Matador Coupe Oleg Cassini edition. Yes, that Oleg Cassini, the fashion designer to Jackie Kennedy, was AMC's attempt to blend high fashion with muscle-era swagger. The result? A car that looked like a disco ball, mated with a muscle car. The styling was wild. A massive grille that looked ready to swallow traffic, a swooping fastback roofline, opera windows, gold accents, and designer badging. It had presence. It had attitude. But performance? That's where the curtain dropped. Underneath all that glam, the Matador Coupe had engines ranging from a 304 to a 360 V8. Sounds decent until you realize they were choked by smog equipment, producing as little as 120 to 150 horsepower. The car weighed over 4,000 pounds, meaning 0 to 60 times in the 14 to 16 second range, assuming the carburetor felt like cooperating. Worse, the handling was sloppy. It wallowed in corners, floated over bumps, and responded to steering like it was taking suggestions, not commands. AMC promised sophistication, but delivered a rolling contradiction, a fashion statement that couldn't back up the swagger with speed. People who saw the Cassini badge thought they were buying something exclusive. Instead, they got a slow-moving art piece on white walls. This wasn't just a bad sleeper, it was performance cosplay. And what came next? Let's just say it had rally stripes, and absolutely no business wearing them. 1976 Chevrolet Monza Coupe Iron Duke. The 1976 Chevrolet Monza Coupe looked like a shrunken Corvette and wore its curves like a sports car ready for action. It had the stance, the sleek lines, even optional stripes and sporty wheels. Chevy marketed it as a compact performance car for the masses, something that could give imports a run for their money and maybe surprise a few Mustangs along the way. But then came the cruel twist, the Iron Duke. This infamous 2.3-liter inline-4 was anything but iron-hearted. With just 78 horsepower and all the charm of a lawnmower engine, the Monza became a masterclass in unmet expectations. 0 to 60, try 18 seconds. Maybe longer if the AC was on. And the engine note, more groan than growl. Chevy offered V8 options, yes, but buyers lured in by the base price often got this underwhelming lump under the hood. You'd pull up to a light looking like a silent assassin and then stall trying to merge onto the freeway. The Monza had every ingredient to be a sleeper, except power, performance, and, well, credibility. And if you think that's bad, wait till you see the next car, which took the legendary Roadrunner name and strapped it to a family sedan. Like finding out your favorite childhood cartoon was voiced by a fax machine? Hit subscribe so you never miss another deep dive into forgotten automotive disasters. 1977 Plymouth Roadrunner. The 1977 Plymouth Roadrunner is what happens when nostalgia meets cost-cutting and loses. By the late 70s, the Roadrunner badge had serious legacy. It used to mean raw, unfiltered muscle. But slap that same badge on a Volare, you've basically thrown a varsity jacket on a mall cop and called him a linebacker. On paper, it looked like the spirit was still alive. It had the stripes, the bold graphics, rally wheels, and even a spoiler. From a distance, you might squint and see the ghost of late 60s glory. But get behind the wheel, and reality hits like a flat note on a broken horn. The base engine, a 225 slant 6, making about 100 horsepower. Even the optional V8s were dulled by emissions regulations. The 318 made just 140 horsepower, and even the top trim 360 barely cracked 170 horsepower in a car that weighed over 3,400 pounds. The result? 0 to 60 in 13 to 14 seconds, with a suspension that handled like a mattress on casters. What made it worse? This version of the Roadrunner wasn't even consistent. Depending on the options, it could come with bench seats and column shifters. Hardly muscle car material, it became more of a style package than a performance machine. So here's the real question. Do you think legacy badges should be retired when the performance dies? Or is it okay to revive them just for style? Drop a comment and let me know, because this Roadrunner wasn't catching anything except disappointed looks. 8. 1976 Toyota Corolla SR5 liftback, US spec. The 1976 Toyota Corolla SR5 liftback looked like it was ready to race through Tokyo side streets or blast down Route 66. With its fastback silhouette, sporty flares, and bold SR5 badging, it promised excitement. This was Toyota's attempt to infuse their practical compact with a little flair, a touch of GT spirit in a daily commuter's body. And for a moment, it almost worked. But peel back the styling, and you'll find one of the most misleading packages of the decade. Under the hood sat a 1.6-liter inline-4, pushing out a modest 75 horsepower at best. Even with a manual transmission, the 0 to 60 time hovered around 13.5 seconds, and it struggled on inclines like it had stage fright. That racing-inspired liftback design, it was mostly for looks. The car was light, sure, but so was a lawn chair, and it didn't claim to be a sports car. The SR5 badge had been used on earlier, more exciting models, but in the US spec of this Corolla, it became little more than marketing glitter. Handling was tight enough for city streets, but on the highway, it felt buzzy and underpowered. You weren't carving corners, you were clinging to the right lane. For anyone who bought it thinking they'd found a hidden gem, a sleeper that could hang with Z cars or even base Mustangs, this car delivered a cold, underwhelming reality. It looked the part, it wore the badge, but when you dropped the clutch, nothing happened. 7. 1975 Dodge Charger SE 318 V8. The 1975 Dodge Charger SE looked like it had something to prove. Big, bold, and dripping in chrome, it carried the muscle car legacy on its wide shoulders. The SE stood for Special Edition, and Dodge leaned into the personal luxury trend. Opera windows, vinyl roofs, hidden headlights, it had it all. And yet, under all that glitter, a chassis that barely got out of its own way. Under the hood, the standard engine was a 318 cubic inch V8, making just 145 horsepower. That's right, 145. In a car that weighed over 4,200 pounds, you'd have better luck pushing it downhill with the windows up. The Charger used to be a street legend. The 68 to 70 models were icons, but by 1975, it had ballooned into a full-size cruiser, pretending to still be athletic. The SE trim was supposed to be upscale and powerful. What it actually delivered was a disconnected, floaty ride and acceleration so slow, it made you question if the gas pedal was working. It looked like it could chase down a Firebird. It drove like it was the Firebird's dad, taking the scenic route. And the interior? Plush, sure. You got shag carpet, crushed velour, and a dashboard that looked like it came from a lounge. But that just made the lack of speed more frustrating. This wasn't a car for sleepers. It was a car for nappers. But if you thought this car was all bark and no bite, wait till you see the next one. It had a rally badge and the soul of a toaster. 6. 1975 Ford Pinto Stallion. The 1975 Ford Pinto Stallion is proof that stripes and blackout trim can't save a bad idea. Ford tried to give the humble Pinto a sporty makeover, calling it Stallion, dressing it up with flat black accents, bold decals, and even offering bucket seats and styled wheels. On the outside, a little Mustang DNA. On the inside, pure disappointment, because under the hood sat the same old engines. A 1.6-liter four-cylinder, or, if you were lucky, a 2.3-liter inline-4, pushing out a breathtaking 88 horsepower. 88. In a car that weighed over 2,000 pounds and had all the aerodynamic grace of a loaf of bread. Sure, it was light, but that didn't help much. The Stallion couldn't gallop, it trotted. 0 to 60 times stretched past 14 seconds, and the engine screamed in protest if you dared merge onto the highway. Handling was twitchy, the ride was harsh, and the overall build quality? Let's just say, the only thing sleeper about this car was how many people fell asleep waiting for it to reach 55. They gave it a name that evokes power and grace, Stallion. What they delivered was more angsty pony on roller skates. The worst part, the Stallion package looked good. Parked at the curb, it hinted at mischief. But once you turned the key, the illusion crumbled faster than a Pinto rear end in a fender bender. But as bad as this rebadged grocery getter was, the next car somehow made looking like a muscle car even more misleading. 5. 1978 Chevrolet Nova Custom Coupe 305 V8. The 1978 Chevrolet Nova Custom Coupe was GM's idea of giving the Nova one last hurrah, a send-off with style, attitude, and supposedly performance. The coupe version had muscle car lines, square-jawed aggression, rally wheels, and optional stripes. It looked like it meant business, especially in darker colors with chrome accents. This thing had curb appeal until it had to actually move. Equipped with a 305 cubic inch V8, you'd expect some punch. But in reality, you got just 145 horsepower and a sluggish 0 to 60 time of nearly 13 seconds. All that engine for basically nothing. It was like bringing a boombox to a fight and finding out it only plays elevator music. You hit the gas and the engine responded, eventually. There was a delay, not turbo lag, just hope lag. The suspension was soft, the steering was vague, and the whole car felt like it had given up halfway through its own existence. Sure, you could option it up to look sporty, dual exhaust tips, chrome trim, rally gauges. But it was all window dressing on a chassis that hadn't evolved since the early 70s. The Nova was meant to be a budget performance machine, but by 78, it had become a shell of its former self, bloated with emissions controls and saddled with a V8 that made more noise than motion. A sleeper? Only if the goal was to lull you into thinking you bought something fast. But the next car took this deception one step further, because it wore a badge once feared at every stoplight, and turned it into a punchline. 4. 1973 Pontiac Grand Am. The 1973 Pontiac Grand Am was supposed to be a revolution, a European-inspired sports sedan with American V8 muscle. Pontiac pitched it as their answer to BMW and Mercedes. A refined, powerful road car that blended style, luxury, and speed. And with a name like Grand Am, it sure sounded like it belonged on the racetrack. Too bad it drove more like a soggy armchair than a corner carver. Sure, it looked sharp. The Endura nose gave it a sleek, almost futuristic front end. It had optional radial-tuned suspension, sporty wheels, and even bucket seats with a center console. You could get a 400 or 455 V8 under the hood, but even those were dulled by mid-70s emissions restrictions. The 455 made just 250 horsepower in its best form. But with the car tipping the scales at over 4,000 pounds, performance was sluggish at best. 0 to 60 times hovered around 9 to 10 seconds, and handling? Let's just say the radial tune part was more marketing than engineering. This was Pontiac's European sports sedan, except it couldn't handle like a European sedan, and it barely felt like a sport anything. Worse still, it quickly earned a reputation for poor build quality. Rattles, electrical gremlins, and sagging interiors plagued owners. The Grand Am looked like it was destined to challenge the imports. Instead, it barely outran its own shadow. So much ambition, so little delivery. It wasn't a grand tour, it was just grand disappointment. And if you think that's bad, wait till you meet the next one. It looked like a NASCAR warrior but drove like a retired taxi. Like discovering cars that failed to deliver? Subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown in automotive deception. 3. 1978 Dodge Magnum XE. The 1978 Dodge Magnum XE looked like it just rolled off a NASCAR pit lane. Hidden headlights, a long, low-slung profile, raked windshield. It had all the visual drama of a car built to dominate. It even replaced the Charger in Dodge's lineup, carrying the torch of street presence and racing DNA. On paper, it had the look of a highway monster. In reality, it was more couch than car. Base models came with a 318 V8, producing just 140 horsepower. Even the performance versions with the 360 or 400 cubic inch V8 engines barely cracked 175 horsepower, strangled by late 70s emissions tech. The car weighed well over 4,000 pounds. In the 0 to 60, a lazy 11 to 13 seconds, depending on how ambitious you were with the gas pedal. You could order one with a T-top, sports steering wheel, and handling package. But at the end of the day, it still drove like a mattress on marshmallows. The Magnum had the stance of a street fighter, but no footwork. It was soft, slow, and numb behind the wheel. Dodge dressed it up like a bruiser, but under all that flash, it just wanted to cruise. Very slowly. It's the kind of car that made promises with its face and broke them with its engine. So here's the question. Should aggressive design be forgiven if the performance doesn't back it up? Or does that make it even worse? Drop a comment and let me know. Because the next car, it might be the biggest performance betrayal in pony car history. 2. 1979 Ford Mustang II King Cobra. The 1979 Ford Mustang II King Cobra had all the ingredients of a street menace on paper. Bright, fire-breathing graphics, bold King Cobra lettering across the sides, a deep chin spoiler, flared fenders, rear window louvers, and that unmistakable snake decal stretching across the hood like it meant business. At a glance, this was the Mustang to fear at the stoplight. And then, you started it. Under the hood sat a 302 cubic inch V8, which sounds promising until you realize it made just 139 horsepower. That's not a typo. Despite all the flair and fury in its appearance, the King Cobra barely had enough grunt to move itself with confidence. The 0 to 60 time? A sluggish 10.5 seconds, and that's being generous. The only thing king about it was the sticker package. The Mustang II was already a controversial car, built on a Pinto platform and engineered more for fuel economy than fun. The King Cobra tried to swing the pendulum back toward performance, but forgot to bring any actual performance. Soft suspension, numb steering, and a powertrain that wheezed under pressure made it the ultimate case of style over substance. It looked like it could chase down a Z28 or a Trans Am. It drove like it was late for a dentist appointment. But believe it or not, one car did it even worse. Coming up, a rally edition so slow, it made this king look like royalty. Into exposed pretenders and badge-born disappointments? Subscribe for more brutal breakdowns. 1. 1976 Chevy Chevette Rally 1.6. The 1976 Chevy Chevette Rally 1.6 might be the most shameless example of badge-based deception in the entire decade. Chevy took one of the slowest, most basic economy cars on the market and tried to dress it up as something sporty. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. They called it the Rally Edition. Added racing stripes, a blacked-out grille, maybe some fake chrome wheels, just enough to fool someone squinting from across the street. But under the hood, a 1.6-liter inline-4 that made a heartbreaking 60 horsepower. Yes, 60. Paired with a 4-speed manual and weighing just under 2,300 pounds, the Rally couldn't even rally itself out of a parking lot. 0 to 60 took a yawning 18 seconds if you pushed it hard and prayed the wind was behind you. Chevy tried to sell excitement. What they delivered was a sewing machine in costume. Handling? Forget it. The Chevette had numb steering, paper-thin tires, and suspension better suited for bouncing than cornering. It didn't feel connected to the road. It felt terrified of it. And the interior? A plastic, fantastic box with vinyl so thin, it practically tore if you looked at it wrong. This car wasn't just a failure as a sleeper, it was a failure as a car. The Rally trim might have sounded fast. It might have looked kind of fast. But trust us, nothing about this Chevette moved quickly. Not the engine, not the handling, not even resale value. Which one of these fake fast flops fooled you the most? Drop your pick in the comments. I want to hear which one looked the part but totally let you down. And if you're into cars that talk a big game but stall when it's showtime, hit that like and subscribe, because we're just getting warmed up. The 70s were full of poser performance, but in the next video, we're flipping the script. We're diving into the sleepers that actually delivered. Cars so quick, they embarrassed muscle legends and vanished into obscurity. No hype, no chrome, just pure underrated power. Stick around.